He holds the future, and life is worth the living just because he lives. Verse 3. And then one day, I'll cross the river, I'll fight life's fight, no war with pain. And then as death gives way to victory, I'll see the lights of glory, and I'll know he lives. Because he lives, I can face tomorrow. Because he lives, all fear is gone. Because I know he holds the future, and life is worth the living just because he lives. All right. Let's go ahead and open in prayer this morning. Heavenly Father, thank you we can be here today. Thank you that we all made it safely in spite of the weather, and just help us to have a good time of fellowship, also to learn from your word, to be challenged, to understand some of the parallels between the promised land and the nation of Israel being your chosen people as to our spiritual walk, our spiritual life as well. And help us to be motivated to follow you, to serve you, and to keep pressing on and upward in spiritual growth. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, so second song is, 689. I'm dwelling in Beulah, it's the promised land, 689. 689. 600, no, I did not. And Chris is going to play this one for me. We're going to do the first and the last. 689, I'm bound for the promised land, that's what it's called. I know it as On Jordan's Stormy Banks I Stand. So, I am bound for the promised land. Cool. It's a cool song. It's a, do you need it on? Jackson, can you go to the back and turn off there should be a light right here on one of the switches for Mom to have the piano light. Good stand by, Mom. All right, thank you, Jack. All right, so the first and the last of I Am Bound for the Promised Land. Verse 1. Are you ready? On Jordan's stormy banks I stand and cast a wishful eye to Canaan's fair and happy land, where my possessions lie. I am bound for the promised land. I am bound for the promised land. Oh, who will come and go with me? I am bound for the promised land. Verse 4. When shall I reach that happy place and be forever blessed? When shall I see my Father's face and in his bosom rest? I am bound for the promised land. I am bound for the promised land. Oh, who will come and go with me? I am bound for the promised land. All right, before David comes for announcements, I sang this song on purpose, or we sang this song on purpose. So literally, there's been something so the concept of the Jordan River separating us from heaven, because if you read this song, if you sing this song and read the words, this is clearly talking about eternity. It's talking about when we see our Father's face. It's where our possessions lie, our spiritual possessions. It's all about that. this is not biblically what the Jordan River represents. So this is something where it's a beautiful song. We can get into the emotion, we can get into the idea of the song, that's fine. Now, interestingly enough, from Moses' perspective, it actually is fairly fitting. Because Moses, you remember, he was not allowed to enter the promised land. So he did die before that. So he stands on the banks of the Jordan, or on Mount Pisgah is where it was. He went to the mountain. He was able to kind of look out and see the land. And there's a song about that too, the Sweet Hour of Prayer, that references that as well. So from Moses' perspective, there is some parallels here where he didn't quite get there, and it was kind of the end of the journey for him. But for the nation of Israel, it does not represent heaven. We're going to see as we get into it this morning, we're going to see some parallels, we're going to see some things. There are a couple of songs that mention the Jordan River as far as crossing the Jordan River in death and getting to heaven. And again, the picture is beautiful, the idea is beautiful, but we have to understand what it really means. What does the Jordan River mean to us? Because I think as we understand that it will open up our understanding of how we are supposed to live as Christians. It makes a difference to our lives today. But literally, I've been building up to this point. This entire series is literally building up to this point of what does it mean to be in the promised land? What does it mean to cross into the promised land? Because this is really the core idea that we want to understand as Christians for our lives here on earth. Okay, so a little teaser. I'll get into that more as we get into it. But David, ready for you with announcements.
Good morning, everyone. All right, announcements for the week. Of course, it's Sunday morning service. We have our usual lunch following the service, and then our 2:30 afternoon prayer service. School should be normal this week. We've got, I think it's actually men's Bible study this week, isn't it?
Yeah.
Men's Bible study on Thursday, 6:45, here in the basement. Still working on planning for the early stages of beginning on softball, so we're talking about that, but getting the schedule and all that stuff going. But
let's tentatively plan like a outdoor work cleanup day Saturday as well.
Okay.
More information to follow.
Try for a spring cleanup this week on Saturday if anyone's willing and are able. We'll send out some text messages and so on. Probably be afternoon, evening.
Oh, that's right.
What?
Right, trail like bowling activities Saturday.
Oh.
What time is that? Okay, never mind then. Well, to be adjusted.
Okay, maybe next week. So I guess we have a Saturday already. So I think that's it. Normal schedule next week. Breakfast in the morning, 15-ish. Morning service at 11 with lunch following, and the afternoon service at 2:30. That's it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we do have some things coming up in the near future. And of course, as we are getting used to, but our schedule is a little bit fluid right now with the sale of the building and everything. They have requested having an open house here on a Sunday so that all of their people can come and look at the building and stuff. They have not given me a date for that yet, so just be aware. We'll probably, on whatever Sunday that is, we'll probably just be done after the morning service. Maybe we'll go to a park for lunch or something to let them have the building in the afternoon. But I don't have a date on that yet, so I will keep everyone informed as I am informed. Let's go to 291. I'm pretty sure that's right. 291, higher ground. Again, kind of the theme of what we're looking at, the idea of spiritual growth. The idea of making forward progress. It's not that we have attained anything specific or any sort of a plateau where we can be like, yes, we have arrived. But that the spiritual life, the Christian life and walk is one of constant growth, and that I desire to keep pressing upward. So higher ground. Let's do the first, stand for the second, and then we'll do our greeting time. 291. Verse 1. I'm pressing on the upward way, new heights I'm gaining every day, still praying as I onward bound, Lord, plant my feet on higher ground. Lord, lift me up and let me stand. My faith on heaven's tableland, a higher plane that I have found. Lord, plant my feet on higher ground. I want to live above the world, though Satan's darts at me are hurled. For faith has caught the joyful sound, the song of saints on higher ground. Lord, lift me up and let me stand, by faith on heaven's tableland, a higher plane than I have found. Lord, plant my feet on higher ground. All right, let's greet each other. All right, that should be good. All right, as we are seated, verse 3, higher ground, verse 3, as we get seated. Want to scale the utmost height and catch a gleam of glory bright, but still I'll pray till heaven I've found. Lord, lead me on to higher ground. Lord, lift me up and let me stand, by faith on heaven's tableland, a higher plane that I have found. Lord, plant my feet on higher ground. Yep, and I think we have a fourth verse that we don't have. All right, children's story. If there's any children interested. I saw that. All right. So as far as I know, this is a true story. Okay, I don't know the man's name, but I heard it from another pastor, and he told it as if it was a true story, so I think it's a true story. Okay, I trust it. So there was a small town, and I think it was in Texas, and they were building a railroad bridge across a river. So that takes a while. It takes some time, and trains are heavy, right? And they carry a lot of stuff, so it has to be a pretty strong bridge. And when it was done, they had a celebration, and one of the things that they did to open the bridge was they took 2 trains that were both big, heavy trains, and they started from each end of the bridge and slowly drove them toward each other until they were parked right next to each other in the middle of the bridge. And the owner of the train railway line was there along with the main engineer for the construction and all that. They were talking. And one of the people from the town says, well, why are you doing this? Why are you putting the trains on the bridge? And the engineer said, well, we're testing the bridge. And the guy said, oh, you think it might break? And he said, no, we're proving that it won't break. With even more weight than will normally be on it, the bridge is constructed to handle all the weight it needs to handle. So sometimes when we get tested, we do fail. Sometimes, don't we? But a lot of times we are tested to prove that we're ready. Did you know that? Did you know that even in school, when you take a test, if you can pass the test, you know what that does? It proves you're ready to go on to the next level of that subject. You have learned it. So tests are actually good for you. Now, they're kind of annoying to take. I know that. They're not fun. I didn't like tests in school either. But they're actually very good for you. And they help you learn and help you know what you have learned. Or maybe sometimes it helps you learn things you still need to learn if you don't do so well on the test. But we're going to see today that Joshua, remember last week, Joshua is the new leader of the nation of Israel. Moses has died. Joshua's the new leader. He's going to get tested. Not because God thinks he will fail, but because God is going to prove that Joshua is ready to lead the people and to follow God. Okay, that's what we're going to learn about this morning. You can go back to your seats. All right, so we've been building up to this point. I've got a lot to cover today. I'm going to do my best. We're actually started on a reasonable time today. Well, that's just good. We're less late than normal. But this is really a key element in this entire process of the nation of Israel leaving Egypt, going to Mount Sinai, wandering in the wilderness. Now they've come to the Jordan River. They've had battles. They've had tests. They've had trials. They've had miracles. They've had failings. They've had rebellions, all kinds of stuff. But they finally got to where they're crossing the Jordan River into the promised land. So this is a high mark for them. But as we look at, again, the pattern and the illustration of our own spiritual lives, and again, not every person has every element, but these are common elements as we go through from being in the world and not saved and not part of God's family to becoming saved, to becoming part of God's family. We do face similar struggles, and everybody's, again, are a little bit different. But this is a big part, and it's a big example of where we're supposed to be. So we're going to see that. Now, Joshua is tested. Now, we won't necessarily, if you read through it, you don't look at it and you're like, oh yeah, there's a series of tests that Joshua goes through, but actually that's what it was. Joshua went through a couple of tests both for himself, but to demonstrate and to prove to the nation of Israel that he was the one God had chosen to lead. Remember, Moses had done miracles upon miracles. In fact, when Moses died, we looked at this last week, and so there was never again another prophet like Moses that talked to God face to face. Now, that doesn't mean he saw God, but in terms of conversation, the same way you and I would have a conversation, maybe on the phone, that would be a face to face or a word to word conversation. Now, he did see part of God. Remember, God told him, like, you can't see all of me or else it will kill you. As humans, we can't handle that. And so God had to disguise or cover most of his glory, and Moses could only see a small amount. But also the miracles that Moses had did. No other prophet ever did miracles to the level that Moses did. Even Jesus himself, in a similar way, did not do miracles to that level. For one major reason, Jesus was not trying to draw attention to himself that way. Of course, Jesus' biggest miracle was raising himself from the dead, which Moses did not do anything close to that. But as far as his other miracles of healing and things that Jesus did, were not as big of miracles as Moses. However, Jesus, of course, was not a prophet either, right? Jesus was the Son of God and is the Son of God. So it's a slightly different category. But Moses, as far as Israel's history and his place and his establishing them as a nation, held a very special role. And even in Jesus' day, they talk about a lot about Moses. Moses said this. Moses did this. Moses, and Jesus actually makes the comment. He says, I was alive before Moses was. I was alive before Abraham was. And they didn't like that very well, but it was true. So Jesus himself even says that he was, by the way, who was the God talking to Moses and Abraham? Well, it was the Trinity, but at times at least it would have been Jesus as the Son of God, or as the second member of the Trinity. All right, so Joshua now is going to be tested, though. He's taken over. Now, Moses said that it was from God. God told Moses, pick Joshua. Remember, Moses had several assistants, several people that helped him. Joshua was there one from early on, though, was one of Moses' assistants. As we see him all the way back at Mount Sinai, that he's up on the mountain with Moses during the golden calf incident. So he wasn't involved in that in the camp. And so he's been there. He's been their military leader when they've had battles. Only a couple of times. When they've had battles, Joshua was the one leading the army, whereas Moses is the one leading the nation. Now, it's a change. So God said Joshua was next. God told the nation through Moses, Joshua was next. But now God is going to demonstrate through miracles that Joshua is next. But he's also going to test Joshua himself. Not to try to make him fail, but to prove that he is ready and that give him confidence moving forward. So these are tests. Joshua's being tested. These are also, if we want to have the parallel, they're tests of maturity. See, crossing the Jordan River, and we'll get more into it, but crossing the Jordan River is not a picture of going into heaven. It's actually a picture of going into a mature Christian life. It's where we're supposed to be. The nation of Israel was not supposed to be wandering in the wilderness. They were supposed to be in the promised land. That was God's plan. Because of their disobedience and their failings, they had wandered for a while, but God's plan was still happening. They were still going to get to the promised land. But there's still going to be battles. There's still going to be challenges. I don't know about you, but I'm glad when I get to heaven, there's no battles and there's no challenges. Okay, so those we all have to deal with here on earth. Once you get to heaven, those are gone. So there's not a parallel there of going to heaven, but there is a parallel of maturity. They're ready for it now. So let's review real quick. Oh yes, we do have to see these verses though. Okay, so this is God's challenge to Joshua. We're very familiar with verse 8 at least. Most of us have memorized it. One of the kids just told me last week, this is the only place in the King James Bible where the word success is, which is true. Okay, so not a kid, an adult. You're still a kid to me. And that is technically true. It is the only place where the English word success is. I do have bad news for you. It's also in the verse prior. But Joshua 1 verses 7 and 8. It says, only be strong and very courageous, that thou mayest observe to do according to all the law, which Moses my servant commanded thee. Turn not from it to the right hand or to the left, that thou mayest prosper whithersoever thou goest. By the way, that word prosper is the same word in Hebrew as the word success. This book of the law shall not depart out of thy mouth, but thou shalt meditate therein day and night, that thou mayest observe to do according to all that is written therein. For then shalt thou make thy way prosperous, and then shalt thou have good success. So the first prosper and the word success are the same word. The second, the word prosperous, is actually a different word. So the difference is they're very similar. But the word prosper and the word success have to do with accomplishments, developing a skill, attaining a position, something like that. The word prosperous there, make thy way prosperous, actually has to do with forward motion, keeping moving. Now, obviously those two ideas go hand in hand. If you're going to have success, if you're going to gain a skill, there has to be a forward motion. Maybe it's not physical, but mentally at least, symbolically, there has to be progress. There has to be forward motion. So they all mean basically the same thing, but it is bouncing back and forth between two different words there. But this is a challenge. This is God, and God is the one speaking to Joshua here, and he says, the way to have success is through studying the Word of God, right? Now, they didn't have a whole lot of the Word of God back then, pretty much just what Moses wrote, which was Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Mostly Deuteronomy and Exodus, where the law is, the last half of Exodus, would have been the main things that God is referencing there in terms of the law. But that's the challenge. Now, we're going to see where this plays into, there's a challenge for us there too. But before we do that, let's go ahead and pray, and then we'll remind ourselves of where we are, because again, this is a major turning point for the nation of Israel. Dear Heavenly Father, please be with us today. Help us to understand and to take to heart the challenges, but the joy, the excitement of being in a place where we can represent you, where we can serve you, but you can use us, and that we can do something to accomplish your will, to show you to the world. I pray you would help us to accept that challenge, to make this a goal of our lives, so that as we live, it's not just waiting to get to heaven, not just biding our time, but that we're actually doing something for you while we're here. In Jesus' name, amen. So, I know, I have my map. So real quick, so they started off, roughly speaking, now again, they did not occupy that entire area, but the land of Goshen is in that area in Egypt. That's where they started out. They left Egypt, and of course, remember, somebody childish, if you want to be an adult and be a child, that's fine. I might not call you, but what does Egypt represent? Jeremiah. The world, right. The world, the philosophies of the world, the idea of being in the world before we're part of God's family. So this is where all of us are born that way. None of us are born Christians. That's an individual choice we have to make to accept Jesus Christ's sacrifice. But all of us start out in the world, and we have to choose. Are we going to stay in the world, or are we going to leave the world and follow God and be part of His chosen people? And the church does not replace Israel. I do not mean to in any way, shape, or form make us replacing Israel in any of this. However, there are parallels between us as Christians in the church and what the nation of Israel is going through. So I will reference those parallels, but the nation of Israel is still and will be God's chosen people as an ethnic group. So then they leave Egypt. And of course, the Passover, the death of the firstborn, represents what? There's a word. Now, it represents salvation, but there's a word we looked at. Remember what that word starts with? Redemption, being redeemed. God paid the price, right? God did all the work. The nation of Israel didn't do anything to get out of Egypt except for follow what God said to do. So God did everything. It was all based on God's power. Of course, there was the power between God and the 10 plagues of the gods of Egypt. And he says basically he was stronger than all their gods, and he targeted their different gods with the different plagues. It was intentional. And then he pulled his people out. And they came voluntarily. They chose to leave. They were leaving slavery. They were leaving something that was oppressive, which is the way sin is. And they left. And again, remember, some of these parallels are direct, some are more indirect, but they had a couple of days. Remember, there were about 3 days that they were fleeing, trying to get out. And Egypt's territory, if you remember, is fairly extensive. So Egypt controlled all the way up to that line. And they had influence beyond that, but that's what would have been considered Egyptian territory. And so they're heading for Midian, which is, you can't see it, it's just off the map, but that little word there you can see at the top. This is the area of Midian down here. And that's where they're heading. Remember, that's where Moses was. Moses, when he ran away from Egypt, lived in Midian, married a woman from Midian, raised sheep, served with his father-in-law in Midian, met God on Mount Sinai in Midian. All that happened in Midian. So he's taking them back, and God had told him to do that, bring them back to the mountain. And then they're almost out of Egypt. They're almost out of the reach of Egypt, and God says, oh, turn and get yourself trapped by the edge of the Red Sea. He actually told them that. And now he said, I had a plan, but that's what he told them. So they do that. Moses follows the instructions. They get trapped. The Egyptian army comes in behind them. Remember, they're kind of on that beach at the mountain pass, and they can't get out. There's no way to get out without going past the Egyptian army or trying to swim this arm of the Red Sea would have been God, don't worry, I got it. Calm down. And he said, I need a victory, or his plan was to have a victory over Egypt. Not just in terms of pulling his people out, but showing that he was stronger, that he was better than the nation of Egypt, than the world. And we need to understand that. So he helped them cross the Red Sea. Moses raised the rod, the waters parted, the wind came down and dried out the path. And remember, we looked at it, how the slope was down and to get through steep section, actually, but the slope is the same as a wheelchair ramp, like the one we have here. So there was no point along that path at that particular point that they could not pass with wagons and with children and with animals. They could easily go down the slope and back up, even though it got to be almost 2,400 feet deep at the deepest. So they crossed, but it took all night, and they crossed. And the Egyptians were stupid enough to try to follow them, and remember, God dropped the water on them, and forget about drowning, they all got crushed. I mean, it was instantaneous. You don't survive under 2,400 feet of water. The tallest building in the United States is not that tall. And then they went on to Mount Sinai, which was their destination originally when they left Egypt. And they get there and they spend almost 2 years at Mount Sinai. Now they get the law. We have the incident with the golden calf, of course. They get the law. They are established in terms of how they're going to arrange the camp, how they're going to march. A couple of silver trumpets were built, and they were trained in how to use them for calls in combat. Oh, if you need to go here, if you need to do this, if you need to reinforce this particular place, there were certain signals on these silver trumpets, which was a very unique sound compared to any other horns or trumpets that they had. So they worked all this out. There's actually a great deal of organization there, which is interesting. Sometimes we look at organized religion today, and we're like, well, how much of it's really necessary, right? I just need a personal relationship between me and God. I can go live on a mountain somewhere and have a personal relationship between me and God, and that's true, you can. But if you want to accomplish anything for God, if you want to actually make an impact in the world, it takes some cooperation and it takes some organization. So we need organized religion, but we need organized religion focused on God, focused on Jesus Christ, not focused on ourselves. But there's organization here. Moses also established the 70 elders that were helping him. Joshua was one of those that were helping him. He would give an instruction. They would take it to their tribal groups and pass it down. And there was different levels of authority that were established for the nation to make things easier to hand out instructions, to organize things, both in a civil manner and a military manner. All that happened at Mount Sinai. Now, they were also counted at Mount Sinai. All the military men. By the way, anybody remember, see if one of the younger kids remembers this. How old did you have to be as a man in Israel to be counted in the military? Jordan? 20, correct. In the United States, it's 18, or sometimes they'll let you in at 17. But in Israel, it was 20 years old. By the way, remember that does play into other stories we have, like David and Goliath. David wasn't a 13-year-old kid when he fought Goliath. It says he was a youth, which means he was not military age, or at least he was not in the military. He was probably 19 or 20 years old. He had actually already been recruited by Saul to be his armor bearer during peacetime. Now, during the war, he sent him home. That's why he was back with the sheep. But we can see that we can learn this information and we can use it later on. Things about Israel and how it worked. From Sinai, they went up to Kadesh Barnea. Now, remember, Kadesh Barnea was not a town. They haven't been able to find it because, you can't, it's hard to find just a field in an archaeological site. But they wouldn't have gone to a town because they were invading. So you're not going to go invading to go, book a hotel at the nearest town. You would have camped out in a field somewhere. They go there, they send in the 12 spies, the spies come back. 2 of them had a positive report, 10 of them had a negative report. Remember the song about the 10 spies? And 12 spies, I'm sorry, yes. 10 were bad and 2 were good. And Joshua and Caleb stood up alongside of Moses and Aaron. The entire rest of the group, through their leadership, remember the 70 elders that were established, the entire nation, through their leadership, decided not to go into the land. They rebelled against what God said. So God said, okay. They literally said, we wish we had died in the wilderness. So God said, well, that's what you want? Okay, that's what I'll give you. Every one of you that's an adult, 20 years old and upward, that refused to go into the land, so that meant Moses and Aaron, Joshua and Caleb were accepted from that. Everybody else was in that category, was going to die during the next 40 years of wandering. And the 40 years, they had studied the land. The spies had been in the land for 40 days. So they were going to wander for 1 year. Punishment. Now we do see as they wander, and there's a lot of complaining. Now remember that. Early on, when they leave Egypt, when they're getting to Mount Sinai, even as they're wandering, there's a lot of complaining and whining and grumping. And God does miracle after miracle after He provides water, He provides food, He provides manna, He provides quail so they could have meat. all kinds of stuff. But they also had some punishments that went along with that as well. As they wander, so right now they're kind of just doing some zigzags, and no, that's not supposed to be any sort of a shape. My wife's like, you're trying to draw a pentagram. No, it's just a zigzag of wandering. And we don't know exactly where they went. They came back to Kadesh Barnea again. But around that time, Moses and Aaron made a mistake of striking the rock. Remember the second time? First time they were supposed to strike the rock, second time they were supposed to speak to it. But Moses got mad and struck the rock, and Aaron was involved at some point. So they were then not allowed to go into the promised land because of that. So now it's only Joshua and Caleb from the original group that are actually going to be allowed to cross the Jordan into the promised land. God decides at this point not to send the men through Kadesh Barnea again. So this is the end of the 40 years. They've done their wandering. Pretty much everybody of that generation. As they begin to travel back around, now they're going to cross the Jordan River by Jericho. That's their direction. That's the fiery serpents, because they complained again. Even the new generation, they did complain a little bit. Not as bad, but a little bit. God sent the poisonous snakes, and remember, Moses had to make the brass one and put it up on the pole, and that was a picture of Jesus Christ. And how just looking at Jesus Christ in faith saves people. It's the same way looking at that brass snake in faith saved them from the poison of the snake. And Jesus used that example. But they repented very quickly. We do see that change. Before, they wouldn't really repent. It's not until they've been punished for a while. We see a much faster repentance with the new group. So that's good. They're learning. Slowly, but they are learning. And then they get to Edom and Moab. Now remember, those are relative nations. They're still descendants from Abraham or Abraham's relatives. Edom was a descendant of Esau. Moab was a descendant of Lot, Abraham's nephew, as well as Ammon, which is up here, also a descendant of Lot's children. Excuse me. And so they were not allowed to take their land. They were not allowed to possess anything. It's very specifically spelled out. Give me just a second here. No, I've got a little bit. I'm just a little dry. Just a little dry. All right. So instead of being able, now they asked permission to go through the land. I'm not sure. They even volunteered to buy food and water as they went through. Both Edom and Moab refused to let them go through. So they had to go around. So there was a bit of traveling. It was actually during this loop that they ran into the fiery serpents and stuff. We can kind of understand why they were complaining, but still, not right. Don't complain against God. So they finally get to this area. They're almost to the Jordan River. Now, they've gone around Edom and Moab. They've kind of snuck by Ammon. They've gone between Moab and Ammon. There's some space there. And they get to the Ammonites. Now, so there was the Amorites and the Ammonites. The Ammonites, they could conquer. They could defeat. And we have that box there and that box there, roughly speaking. There was two kings of the Ammonites that both refused them passage, came out to fight them. And remember, Joshua is the military leader. Moses is still the leader of the nation. They defeat both of these. And God says, take their land. You can have it. They're not relatives. They aren't technically to what they were thinking of the promised land yet. But if we go back and we look at Abraham and the line from Abraham, it actually went all the way from here to the Euphrates River, which is somewhere way up here, was the space that they were allowed to occupy. So they have never, to my knowledge, never fully occupied the land promised to Abraham, which tells us that that probably will be happening in the future, most likely during the millennial reign. But Abraham's land he was promised to his descendants this was all included. It wasn't what they were looking at, but it was all included. So they conquer both people groups. They make it to the Jordan River. Now that's where we stopped. Last week we looked at the power change or the authority change. Moses dies. Joshua takes over. And there's some interesting things that happen with the change. Look at how, when we have, and again the parallels we have here, when we as adults have made mistakes, we have to train the next generation, particularly our own kids, but anywhere where we have influence, to avoid those same mistakes. And usually we have to do that by discussing our mistakes, which can be a little humbling. But Moses, when he's writing, by the way, when he writes the book of Deuteronomy, he's writing that toward the end. He's writing that to the new generation. Guess what he talks about? all the mistakes the previous generation had made. Now, some of those guys had been, or those people had been children, and so they had seen it, even up to 18, 19 years old. So they had seen it, they had experienced it. They weren't in authority yet. They weren't adults yet. But Moses, he doesn't say, well, your ancestors were great, your parents were great. Follow their example. He says, hey, they made some mistakes. Learn from their mistakes, don't copy them. So this is actually an important principle we need to understand as Christians. We do make mistakes. We're not perfect. So when we make mistakes, we teach the next generations how to avoid those mistakes, to hopefully help them have a better start. And we see the improvement. One of the biggest things the nation of Israel did leaving Egypt is they complained all the time. They didn't trust God. No, they were still learning how to trust God. Now we see a little bit of complaining, but not very much. And much faster at apologizing when they do complain, of trusting God, and of following the leadership of Moses and Joshua. There's multiple times before where they actually flat out told Moses, we're not going to do what you said. Happened at Kadesh Barnea, happened a couple of other times where they got mad at Moses. They're like, we're not going to do what you say. And we don't see that now. So they do learn. They still make mistakes, but they have learned. But most importantly, they've learned to trust and follow God. Now, as they are nearing the end, and I don't know exactly where it happened, they did a second count. So I thought this would be interesting. I'm going to try to go through it really fast. But we have the count of the military men in Israel when they were at Mount Sinai. And now we have a new count of the military men as they're about to go into the promised land. Jordan, do you have a question?
The fiery serpents, my face told me that they could be cobras.
They could have been cobras. That's possible. Yeah, it doesn't say what they were, but we do know they were poisonous, and there were cobras would have been a possibility. Yep. So we have, this is the layout of how they would camp. So we have the different tribal groups. So we have the tabernacle with the tribe of Levi that would camp around the tabernacle. Now remember, they were not counted in the military census, so we don't know how many military-aged men there were in the tribe of Levi. In fact, when they counted the tribe of Levi, I doubt it. I didn't preach on this, and I doubt anybody remembers this. Do you know how old they started when they counted the men in the tribe of Levi? It was younger. I'll give you that clue. Any guesses? Lucinda? 12 to 13. It's lower than that. Kaylee? Lower than that. Jordan? Lower than that. I'm just going to tell you because this is going to take a while. 1 month old. So the men in Levi were counted from 1 month old, which probably had to do with the infant mortality rate, that once they hit a month, they were more likely to survive. But from a month old up. So, but it wasn't for military service. This was just to know how many men were in the group, in the tribe, for service to the tabernacle. Remember, they were selected for that because they did not worship the golden calf. So they were selected by God to serve in the tabernacle. So they were in the middle of the camp with the tabernacle. Then we have Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun on the front side. And this is to the east. So this is correct, where if you got on a map, north is up, east is to the right. And we're on the east side of the camp, which, by the way, the door of the tabernacle was also on the east side. This is kind of considered the front of the camp. So you want to protect the front gate. And those are the tribal numbers of military men in each tribe. Then we have Reuben, Simeon, and Gad on the south side. We have Ephraim, Manasseh, and Benjamin on the west side, and we have Dan, Asher, and Naphtali on the north side. Now, when they marched, they would march in formations of 3, the same way as they are around the camp in sets of 3. So you have Issachar, Judah, and Zebulun, would be the front. They would be the front edge. They were the front line. And then they would actually take like some of the curtains from around the tabernacle, and they would march there. The Levites would actually have a spot. And then you have the next group, Gad, Reuben, and Simeon, would fill in it. And rather than their particular position, but they would fill up in an upright rank of 3. And then you had the tabernacle, and the articles and the furniture of the tabernacle was there next. And then you had the back 3, Ephraim and Manasseh would fill in that 3rd rank. And then at the end, bringing up the rear when they were marching, was Asher, Dan, and Naphtali to bring up the rear. So they had a military formation when they camped, and when they marched, it was very organized. It was set up, so they were protected at all times. They always had an organized military formation to protect them, whether they were camped or whether they were marching. Now, this, again, they had physical enemies. This matters. But as Christians, we need to be organized. We need to recognize we have an enemy. And we can't necessarily always handle it by ourselves either. So this is a great example of how churches should work together to have different jobs, different roles, different positions. But when we know what we need to do, one of my favorite things is if I know who to call. Oh, this needs to be fixed. I'm going to call this person. I have a question about this. I'm going to call that person. Oh, we need to have a deacons meeting. I know who to call. Having this organization helps us be able to accomplish things. So it's very important. Now, really quickly, I also added the numbers for the second counting and the difference between. So, for example, Judah. Judah had 74,600 men at Mount Sinai. When they hit the Jordan River, or roughly speaking, at that point, they had 76,500. So they went up by 1,900 soldiers. We're going to see a bit of flux up and down. And so that's what, and by the way, it's yellow if it's up, that number will be red if it's down. Okay, so I'm just going to go through real quick. Issachar went up by 9,900. Zebulun went up by 3,100. Reuben went down by 2,770. Simeon went down by 37,100. They dropped by half, almost to a third of their, or south side, dropped. That was their weak side at that point. I don't know if they kept this formation in the promised land or not as they went into military. Ephraim dropped by 8,000. Manasseh went up by 20,000, and Benjamin went up by 10,000, a little bit more. So those ones probably kind of counter the loss there. Dan went up by 1,700. Asher almost 12, and now military men at Mount Sinai was 603,550. At the Jordan River, 601,730. It's only a difference of 1,820. So even with some of these massive ups and downs in the different tribal groups, the whole group stayed almost exactly the same size. This is from an entire generation dying off and a new generation growing up. Their military strength going in at the Jordan was almost identical to the military strength they had going in at Kadesh Barnea if they had followed God. So it's interesting to see that God didn't make them weaker or stronger. It's still a matter of God conquering the promised land, not their military abilities. So we get to Joshua's commission. So now we're back to where we see Joshua being tested. We see God using Joshua. He gives him a commission. So now this is the verses, by the ones we looked at, verses 7 and 8, chapter 1. These are the verses and they matter because they help us understand what 7 and 8 are talking about. So God says, Moses, my servant, is dead. The 30 days of mourning for Moses. What God is saying here is, Moses is dead. That's sad. It's time to move on. It's time to move forward. To make progress. Have success. Forward motion. Now therefore arise, go over the Jordan, thou and all this people, unto the land which I have given, do give thee even to the children of Israel. Every place that the sole of your foot shall tread upon, that I have given you, as I said unto Moses. From the wilderness, skip verse 4. There shall not be any man able to stand before thee all the days of thy life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with thee. I will not fail thee nor forsake thee. Now a lot of times we look at and we memorize Joshua 1:8. Be strong and of a good courage, right? Fear not. But why did God tell Joshua not to be afraid? Because God was with him. We can't forget that part. Okay, we can't forget that God promised Joshua, hey, just like I was with Moses, I will be with you. I will not leave you. God never left Moses. He threatened to leave the nation a couple of times, but he never left Moses. He says, I'll do the same for you. That's why he should be strong and of a good courage. Okay? But then he says this, be strong and of a good courage. For unto this people thou shalt divide the inheritance. Sorry, I lost my spot. To divide inheritance the land which I swear unto their fathers to give them. Now notice it wasn't just be strong and of a good courage, I have a plan. He said, be strong and of a good courage, I will be with you. This is your job. He gave them very specific details, actually. It says, go in, take the land, possess it, but divide it to the nations. By the way, you don't divide it to the tribal groups until it's conquered. Doesn't do any good to divide it before that. So he says, basically, he says, you are going to take them to success. You are going to conquer the land, and you will be the one to divide the land for them. So it's both confidence for Joshua that this is God's plan, he's on the right path, he's doing the right thing, and he'll still be there at the end, which is nice to know. But that he also has a task, he has a mission. It's not just keep following. You know, Abraham had kind of a different mission, didn't he? Go to the land, I'll show you when you get there. Abraham had a lot of faith to do that. He did not have very clear instructions. Here, Joshua is given very clear instructions. It sounds kind of familiar, though, doesn't it? It sounds a lot like these verses for our commission. In Matthew chapter 28, Jesus came and spake to them and said, all power is given unto, by the way, unto who? Unto me, unto Jesus, not unto us. We do not have power. Jesus has the power. Go ye therefore and teach all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, teaching them to observe all things whatsoever I have commanded you. That's our mission. Teach for salvation, teach for discipleship, for growth. And lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the world. By the way, we do not have power, but the one with the power promised never to leave us. So we have access to the one with the power all the time, as long as we are following his will. If we walk away from God, we lose access to the power, because we're not with Jesus anymore. Jesus is like, hey, we got the path, we got the mission, we got the place to go. If we want to see his power and his work, we have to be with him. It's not an issue of salvation, it's an issue of whether we can be functional, whether we can succeed at our Christian walk. We have to walk with Jesus Christ. So then it goes on here. We already read verses 7 and 8 of God, again, commanding Joshua to be strong and of courageous. And by the way, why did God need to tell Joshua to be of good courage? Was the task they were going into easy or hard? Hard. If it was an easy task, it's like, hey, the land's empty, nobody's there, just go build some houses. Oh, okay, that's not too bad. No, there were strong military forces in the land. There were giants in the land. The ancestors of Goliath. Goliath was almost 10 feet tall, and he was big and he was strong. His ancestors lived in the land, and there was more of them. There was an entire people group there of giants, and it's not an exaggeration. And it's not just like, well, okay, they were maybe 6'6". These were big guys, and they were military. They had military strength and experience. They were tough. This was battle after battle after battle. They should not have won any of those battles, much less all of them. This was a tough thing they were going into. So God's being very serious when he tells Joshua, hey, you are going to be afraid. So have courage. By the way, courage is doing what's right even when you are afraid. Doesn't mean you're not afraid. It just means you do what's right in spite of that. So this is a very, very important, but a very serious command. Then we get down to verse 9. Of course, verse 8 tells him how to be successful is to study the Bible, follow the law. That's important. Have I not commanded thee? Following God's instructions. Joshua's not the one in charge. God's the one in charge. God said, go do this. Joshua says, yes, sir. How do we do it? Which you had to ask with Jericho. Be strong and of a good courage. Be not afraid, neither be dismayed. The Lord thy God is with you whithersoever you go. Just like Jesus said, I'm with you even to the end of the world. It's the same thing. We can't get beyond the end of the world. I mean, I know they're trying to put people on Mars, but we can't really get beyond the end of the world. Jesus, and even if they do, it's symbolic. Jesus would still be with us there too. But he's like, I'll be with you. This is the confidence. We sang the song that we, because he lives. Why do we have confidence in the future? Because Jesus is alive and he is with us. It's not just us. It's not us following some archaic list of rules that's been around for thousands of years. We are following a living God who is with us. It's incredibly powerful. Now, I titled this one Salvation versus Discipleship. It actually doesn't touch on salvation. It's distinguishing discipleship, though. This, again, is Jesus' parable. This idea of the promised land is not going into heaven. It's actually going into a place of spiritual maturity, a place where we can be disciples for Christ. Okay, so we see this in John chapter 15. If you keep my commandments, you shall abide in my love, even as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. These things have I spoken unto you, that my joy might remain in you and that your joy might be full. Now, I know I preached on this recently. Being a Christian should be a positive thing. Now, if you imagine the nation of Israel when they crossed the Jordan River and made it into the promised land. Now, they know that there's battles ahead of them. They know that there's difficulties ahead of them. But they've been waiting for this moment for about 43 years. Some of them weren't even born whenever they started this trip. Can you imagine the excitement, the joy? They probably couldn't stop smiling. They get across the Jordan River. We'll get to that in a second. They cross the Jordan River and they set up camp on the inside of the Jordan River by Jericho. And everybody's there's probably just kind of this buzz. They're excited. They don't know exactly what's going to happen, but they're excited. They're like, we're finally where we wanted to be, where we've been looking to get. That's not a picture of heaven, although we will be excited to be in heaven. This should be a picture of us as Christians. We're saved. We are free from sin. We have made some mistakes. We learn from them. Hopefully we're maturing. And we're to a place now where it's like we can do ministry. We can help. We can represent Jesus Christ to the world. And that is a privilege that should be exciting. We should have some joy from that. We should have some smiles from that. Now, there's challenges too. There's tough times. We won't always feel like smiling. The nation of Israel did not always feel like smiling as they conquered the promised land. They had some tough days, some rough battles ahead of them. But there should be an inner excitement and a joy. And that's what Jesus said. He wants us to have that joy. And this isn't when we get to heaven. This is while we're on earth. Then he says this, just a little bit further down. It says, henceforth, or from this point forward, I call you not servants, for, this is the reason, a servant knoweth not what his Lord doeth. But I have called you friends, for all things that I have heard of my Father I have made known unto you. Now again, the privilege. Jesus Christ calling us friends and giving us more detailed instructions. He could just say, do this, do this, do this. And we should obey. But he gives us more information. He tells us why. He tells us long-term plans. He tells us about the rapture. He tells us about the revelation, the tribulation. He tells us about the future, how he wins. He gives us a lot more information than we need. He's helping us be part of the mission. You have not chosen me, but I have chosen you, and ordained you that you should go and bring forth fruit, and that your fruit should remain. So there is a purpose. Remember Joshua's purpose? Joshua, you're going to go and conquer the land and divide it to the tribes. Okay, what's our purpose? In discipleship is to develop fruit. Now, two types of fruit. One is spiritual fruit. Remember, we don't produce that. Jesus does through that. As we submit, as we follow him, spiritual fruit is automatically produced. We cannot produce love or joy or patience. But as we follow God, he will produce those through us. But the second type is impact on other people. Salvations, representing Jesus Christ to people. Maybe they get saved, maybe they don't. But if we give them the gospel, if we tell them, if we can show them in a positive way who Jesus is, that is something that we should have fruit, and the fruit should remain, right? There should be a lasting impact from Christians in the world. Now, he does talk about having chosen them. By the way, and I don't want to get into this, but did Jesus, he's talking to the 12 here in this conversation. Did he choose them? Yes, he individually called them. He said, Peter and Andrew, follow me. James and John, follow me. Matthew, follow me. He chose them and he ordained them, but did he choose them and ordain them for salvation? Is that what the verse says? What was the... Now, I don't want to get too far into this. However, and I have not done an extensive study on it, but ordination is real. It is real in the Bible, but as far as I know, it never references salvation. Once we are saved, which Jesus says in John chapter 3, we have to receive, we have to believe. Jesus himself said that. Once we're saved, God chooses us for a job. Hey, I want you to do that job. Now we've been ordained. Now we've been selected, predestinated, if you will. That word is used sometimes too. for a purpose, for an end of a goal. As far as I know, anytime it uses those terms, it's always talking about some type of spiritual growth or impact, not talking about salvation. Just a minor distinction there. We see that here in that verse. All right. So, one of the exciting things that's going on here, remember what they've been doing for the last 40 years? They've been wandering. Now, if anybody has ever been lost, it's not a whole lot of fun. I've never been lost, but I've been bewildered a few times. Sorry. Somebody asked Daniel Boone that one time, by the way. Daniel Boone, like, did you ever get lost, Daniel Boone, in the wilderness? He's like, well, I was never lost, but I was bewildered once for 3 days. So I can guys admit to being lost. But this is a new path. This is a new area. They've been wandering the same kind of the wilderness, back and forth, and they've been repeating, but they've kind of just been going nowhere. Now all of a sudden they're like, wait, this is new. So look at this in Joshua chapter 3. So God gives Joshua an instruction. Joshua gives the 70 elders the instruction. That's the they here. They commanded the people, saying, when you see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God and the priest bearing it, then you shall remove from your places and go after it. Now remember that formation that they would follow when they would travel, when they would camp and when they would travel? Then he says this, yet there shall be a space between it, about 2,000 cubits by measure, so that's about 3,000 feet. So 1,000 yards. Come not near unto it, that you may know the way which ye shall go, for you have not passed this way before or heretofore. This is a new direction. Nobody knows where they're going anymore. Now that's exciting. It's a little bit terrifying too, but it's exciting. And Joshua said to the people, sanctify yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you. Okay, now think about this for a second. They've been wanting to get here. This has been their destination. But taking the steps to get there, that's challenging. It's difficult. And literally, like, they could go back and they could wander in the wilderness for another 40 years and they got a pretty good idea what they're doing. You know, they've learned the tricks. They've learned the watering holes. They've learned to ask God when they don't have any water. You know, they've pretty much learned how to handle the wilderness. But now they're going somewhere they've never been before. They're going to face challenges they've never faced before. This calls for a level of faith that they have not. It builds on the faith they have, but they have to stretch it to a new level. Now, as a church, we're kind of in this place as well. We're talking about selling the building and relocating it and setting up. I've never done that before. This is a path. I've never been here before. I've never led this type of a thing before. So we are exploring new things and we're trying to pay attention. We're trying to be sensitive to God. We're trying to pray. And sometimes it's like we pray and we're like, come on, God, give us an answer. But he has the timing. He's got it figured out. So we have to trust him. But here, the nation of Israel is kind of in the same spot. Like, hey, this is new. He actually, I like the fact that he says it. He's like, don't get too close to the ark because they're leading, but we don't know. We've never been this way before. So we got to stay back up that we can see where they go and we can follow them. By the way, did anybody notice anything different about the way they marched this time versus the way they marched all the other times before? When the formation would travel wilderness, where was the ark? Was it in the front?
It was in the center.
It was in the center. It was protected. Where's the ark now? It's in the front. It's leading. To my knowledge, it's the first time they've done that. Now, the way that God would do it before is that he had the pillar of fire and cloud. The pillar of fire and cloud would move ahead and guide them, but the ark always stayed in the middle of the camp. And when they would travel, the ark stayed in the middle, so it was protected. But now, God is being very intentional. He's saying that God is the one leading. God is the one, and the ark represented God. God did not live there, but it represented him. They were going to cross the Jordan River, and God was the one directing this. Okay? So again, we see some really cool pictures here. Now, Joshua glorifies God. Now, this could be reversed. God glorifies Joshua as well. Notice the way this is worded. The Lord said unto Joshua, this day, so this is the next day as they're getting ready to cross the Jordan River, this day will I begin to magnify thee in the sight of all Israel. Remember, God is going to do miracles to prove that Joshua was the right man for the job that God had put in there. That they may know that as I was with Moses, I will be with you. And you shall command the priests to bear the ark of the covenant, saying, when you come to the brink of the water of Jordan, you shall stand still in the Jordan. Okay? Now, parting the Red Sea and crossing the Jordan were similar miracles. Both involved water, both involved God separating the water and then passing dry land. Both were considered impassable. See, in some ways was a little bit more of a glorious miracle. It was a little bit bigger, particularly the fact that it killed off the entire Egyptian army as well, which helped. It was a bigger stretch of water. It was deeper. But the miracles are very similar. However, notice the difference in maturity for the differences here. I just make sure I'm not jumping ahead of myself. Actually, I am slightly. Okay, so we'll come back to that. But notice, God says he's going to glorify Joshua. What does Joshua do with that? Joshua says to the children of Israel, come hither and hear the words of the Lord your God. Joshua said, hereby shall you know that the living God is among you, and that he will without fail drive out from before you the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Hivites, the Perizzites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, and the Jebusites. Should I say that 5 times fast? God tells Joshua, I'm going to magnify you. What does Joshua do? He turns it around and magnifies God right back. He goes to the people and says, look at what God is. Joshua could have been out there and been like, yeah, look at what God is doing through me. But Joshua doesn't do that. He's smart enough to know not to do that. He knows that he is God's servant. Even if God glorifies him, that's God's choice. But his job is to glorify God. Everything that Joshua does here, and again, he makes his mistakes, but what he's doing here, he says, look at what God is going to do. Notice the miracle that God is doing, and he's using this to prove who he is. He's still with us. We're on the right path. We're going to have victory. Okay? So God glorifies Joshua, but Joshua glorifies God right back. I think you could actually put it either way. So then they actually crossed the Jordan. This was the part where I was at. So when they crossed the Jordan, it says, and it shall come to pass, as soon as the soles of the feet of the priests that bear the ark shall rest in the waters of Jordan, that the waters of Jordan shall be cut off from all the waters that come down from above, and they shall stand on a heap, or they're going to pile up. Okay? Now remember, the waters in the Red Sea were stationary. It was not a flowing water, so both sides kind of separated. Here, literally, it's just like God takes his hand and goes, bloop, and stops the water, and it just piles up, and the water that was in the river just keeps running down and disappears. I mean, it goes down into the Dead Sea. So the water level would just very rapidly drop and disappear. And then it does say they crossed on dry land, so again, we do have that dry land concept again. But it's different. This is where I was thinking, the maturity of the miracle. When they were ready to cross the Red Sea, everybody was freaking out. And again, understandably, the Egyptian army has showed up. They're trapped. They think they're going to get killed or put back into a worse imprisonment than they were, a worse slavery than they were before. So we can kind of understand. There wasn't very much faith there. Right? And so God says, stand still and watch what I'm going to do. And then he, through Moses, separates the Red Sea. Once it's separated, once it's dry, once the miracle is done, then he says, go through. And they did. Here, he tells Joshua, announce what's going to happen before it happens, but it's not going to happen until the priests get their feet wet. So the miracle was not done. They walk up and put their feet into the water. That's the kind of faith that it took. Now, it wasn't just the priests, it was Joshua's faith, it was people's faith. Notice nobody's freaking out. Nobody's terrified. Granted, there's nobody behind them either. That helps. But they're watching, they're waiting, they're expecting this miracle. They're just like, what's God going to do? How's he going to do this? What's it going to look like? Remember, most of these people either were very young or were not alive when the Red Sea was parted. So they've heard about it, but they didn't see it. Now they're going to see it. And so the feet get wet. And God parts the water. Now, in the verses that I skipped here, it says that the Jordan River at this point was in flood stage. So in the spring, as the waters melted, it was more rain. There wasn't a lot of snow in that area, but whatever there was melting. The Jordan River is usually a fairly quiet river, kind of winds, kind of a meandering path through, the Rum River, actually. Kind of a meandering path through, and it's fairly quiet. And actually, we named one of our sons Jordan. The word literally means to flow down calmly. It's like this calm, like the wind peace like a river kind of a deal. Well, when Jordan was in its flood stage, it had a very different personality. It would overflow its banks. It was great for the farmers because it would deposit all kinds of good mineral-rich dirt up on the sides and wash dirt up out of the riverbank and up into the farmlands where they could use it. But it was considered impassable at flood stage. There were no fords. There were no boats that you could use to cross the Jordan River during flood stage. Now, it doesn't tell us, but I can kind of imagine the people in Jericho watching. And they know that the nation of Israel has arrived, and they're camped on the far side of the Jordan. And the people of Jericho, and again, it doesn't tell us this, but reading between the lines, they're probably sitting there looking at the Jordan River, knowing what time of year it was, knowing everything going on, and they're probably like, we have at least a month before they can attack us because they can't cross the Jordan right now. They have to wait for the waters to go down before it's fordable, before it is crossable. So they're probably kind of gathering supplies, getting their people in, but they're not under any particular pressure because they think they have time. And then God stops the Jordan River. They walk across, and they can't. I can just imagine the people in Jericho freaking out. And like, holy cow, our time scale just got bumped up. Get everybody in, get whatever supplies you can, and get inside the walls because the enemy is here at our door. Okay? So, again, that's all. It doesn't tell us that, but I can kind of imagine them having that reaction. This miracle gave them essentially the element of surprise. So it was not just practical in that it showed the nation of Israel that God was still the same God. He could still perform the same miracle of crossing the Red Sea with the Jordan River. Joshua was his man, but it also threw the tempo of the enemy off. Whatever they had planned, they were going to get, whatever reinforcements they were going to get, they did not now have time to get. The Israelites are now camped, in some way so that it's safe, but they're camped right by Jericho. They're ready to attack Jericho, and Jericho is not prepared for that. So it is practical in a military sense as well. So they cross the Jordan. There's another thing that happens real briefly here, if I can get the right page up, and that is that as they're crossing, they make a memorial. Okay? For sake of time, I'm going to kind of skim over this a little bit, but it is important. When they were crossing, Joshua said, hey, I need one man from each tribe. When we walk through the Jordan River, grab a rock from the bottom and bring it with to the other side. Okay? Now, again, assuming humans are the same back then as they are now, which I'm pretty sure they were, I can just imagine these were not small rocks. Because if you're walking down with 12 other, I'm from the tribe of Benjamin. There's the guy from the tribe of Judah. There's the guy from the tribe of Issachar. There's the guy from the tribe of Gad. Who's going to get the biggest rock? Right, they're men, right? That's what they're going to do. So everybody's looking around. They're like, what's the biggest rock I can grab out of the riverbed and carry to get up to the other side? So these aren't little hand-sized rocks. There's some competition going on here. I think it's safe to assume that they're like, which tribe is going to have the biggest rock when we get to the other side? So they get to the other side, and then when they camped, they put these rocks in a formation. Now it says make a memorial. I don't know if there's 12 rocks. When they built altars, they were supposed to have 12 stones in them. So it's very likely that it actually had the same appearance as an altar, although they did not use it as an altar. But it probably had a similar appearance. But they made it as a memorial. Now notice the purpose. They carried them out, but in verse 6 it says this. It says, this is a sign that when your children ask their fathers in time to come, saying, what are these stones? Why do we have this pile of rocks here? You shall answer them that the waters of Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord, when it passed over Jordan, and the waters of Jordan were cut off. These stones shall be a memorial for the children of Israel forever. When God does great things in our lives, we need to tell our children about it. We need to have memorials in our lives. We need to have situations where it's like, hey, our children, by the way, need to learn our faith. Now, they have to develop their own faith as well. But when they learn, they can gain kind of a start from us. Hey, God did these miracles for us. He's still the same God. He can do similar miracles. Now, remember, God likes to change things up. He rarely does he do the same miracle twice. And even when he does, he mixes things up like he did here. But we need to have memorials for our children. That's very important. They have the first Passover in the Promised Land. By the way, that tells us what time of year it was. Passover's next month. It's coming up here pretty quick. So their first Passover is in the land. Again, a very exciting time. It also tells us they did not attack Jericho immediately. This is a 7-day feast. They took some time. But Jericho would have been they would have been completely closed up. They would have been under guard that whole time while this was all going on. And the children of Israel camped in Gilgal, kept Passover on the 14th day of the month, even on the plains of Jericho, right outside Jericho. And they did eat of the old corn of the land on the morrow after the Passover. Excuse me. So now my assumption here, and it does not go into detail, but it was typical in those days that they had the walled city. Jericho was a walled city, but not everybody actually lived in Jericho or had a house in Jericho. Most of the farmers lived out in the land. You'd only go into town to stay there is if there was an enemy present. So as the Israelites crossed the Jordan River, all the farmers freaked out and ran into town. Well, guess what's still on the farms? All the store. Now remember, it's spring. So this would have been the stores of grain from the previous year. It says the old corn, not new corn, the old corn. So they're going through to the farms, and again, this is military, this was acceptable, and they're raiding the storehouses, but they're now eating material, food from the land.Hy is that significant? God told them that they would, but He's been providing manna for them because they did not have enough in the wilderness. Now they're in a land that produces plenty of food, and guess what? There's a whole bunch of it just lying around, and the owners aren't going to be coming back for it, so they have access to it. And notice what happened. The day after that, no more manna. The day after they had eaten of the old corn of the land, the manna ceased. Neither had the children of Israel manna anymore. It never came back. But they did eat of the fruit of the land of Canaan that year. So God provided exactly what they needed up until they didn't need it anymore. And then God stopped. Now, remember how sick they were of manna? I'll bet about a month later, back. Never came back. Never came out again. It was a unique provision for a certain period of time. God knew they needed it. When they didn't need it anymore, they had something else. Interesting. God, He takes care of us. He doesn't usually give us more than we need, although they would have had plenty of food for sure. But they did not need this miracle food anymore. So it was taken. Now the last test we want to look at with Joshua. This was a personal one for Joshua. Now God has already demonstrated to the nation that Joshua is the man for the job. But there's a question of who's in charge. Who is in charge? Now they've crossed the Jordan River. Okay? They are now in enemy territory. Joshua takes a walk one time. It came to pass when Joshua was by Jericho. Now, that probably means that he was out kind of surveying, maybe even kind of not spying per se, but trying to get a lay of the land, looking at the defenses of Jericho. He's not in the camp. He's out by Jericho. He lifts up his eyes and looks, and behold, there stood a man over against him. Now that means kind of in an aggressive posture facing him, but not like right in front of him. There's a little bit of a distance between them. And he had his sword drawn in his hand. Now that's a very aggressive posture. Okay? You don't go up to some stranger with your sword drawn unless you are either attacking or suspecting you're going to be attacked. Okay? So Joshua walks up to him. Well, he's close enough to talk. And he says, "Are you for us or are you for our enemies? Which side are you on? You got your sword drawn, dude. I mean, if you want to go, let's go." Now remember, Joshua's been the military leader for better than 40 years. He's in his 80s probably, but he's still in his full strength. So he has military experience. He has weapons training. But he's still strong enough. He could probably take this guy on. So Joshua's not thinking, he's like, I don't have to go get recruited. I don't have to, call my bodyguards or whatever. He's like, all right, this guy wants to talk. He's like, if he wants to talk, we'll talk. If he wants to fight, we'll fight. Which side is he on? But even Joshua here, there's this kind of this aggressive posturing going on here. And then the man says, he says, no. It's an interesting question. Are you on our side or on our enemy's side? Nope. That's not a no question. Okay. He says, but as captain of the host of the Lord am I now come. The question isn't, Joshua, am I on your side? The question is, are you on my side? And Joshua fell to his face to the earth and did worship and said unto him, what saith my Lord to his servant? By the way, this was not an angel. This was probably Jesus Christ. This was a physical presentation of God in the Old Testament. So as far as we understand theology, this would be the second member of the Trinity, who we know as Jesus. Though this was, of course, before he was born as Jesus. The fun word for it, it's a Christophany if you want the fancy word. But this is Jesus appearing to Joshua as human. And the captain of the Lord of hosts said unto Joshua, loose thy shoe from off thy foot, for the place where you stand is holy. God did so. Now remember, God gave Moses the exact same instruction at the burning bush. Take your shoes off, this is a holy place. So we see very clearly, this is not an angel. Angels don't require this. We see angels talk to people in multiple places. They never require, in fact, they don't even accept worship. You can't worship an angel. They know better. They know who they serve. They know that they are not worthy of worship. Worship goes to God. So whenever we see someone in Scripture accepting worship, it's either the devil or God. But in this case, it's a positive. So it's God. So this is Jesus Christ proving to Joshua. By the way, this is a test, though. Joshua has just kind of been puffed up by God. He's been promoted by God. He's been glorified by God. He's been magnified by God. He's just led the nation of Israel across the Jordan River. That's pretty exciting. They're in the land. They just had the Passover. They're getting ready to conquer. And Joshua's like, kind of hyped up and ready to go. And now he comes in and he kind of challenges Joshua. What's Joshua going to do? Is Joshua going to say, hey, you put me in charge, let me be in charge? But we see a great deal of humility in Joshua. This is the perfect response, by the way, exactly what he should have done. As soon as he realized who he was talking to. Now, his aggressive posturing before was also perfectly acceptable. Because here he doesn't know, is this guy an enemy or a friend? And he doesn't realize who he's talking to. As soon as he recognizes, this is my boss. Yeah, I'm in charge of the nation of Israel, but this is my boss. He immediately bows. By the way, if someone comes up to you with a sword, the worst thing you can do is put your head down in a military situation, in a military sense, because you are completely blind, you're completely defenseless. If it's an enemy, you're dead. Okay? So Joshua, the fact that he bows, and not only just bows, but he put his face on the ground, shows he knew exactly who he was talking to, and he trusted the man with the sword. He was going to follow it. So we see Joshua here. He passes the test with flying colors. He's submissive to God. He's doing his job. He's leading the people. He's even protecting them where he needs to. But he's also submissive and following God. Now we're going to see how that plays out, because he's going to give the man, Jesus, is going to give Joshua some very strange instructions on how to conquer Jericho. Okay? It had to have been comical for Joshua to report this back to the camp. Guys, I've got some news. We're going to attack Jericho, that's the good part. But it's going to look different than we expected. I can imagine how that conversation went too. But that's for next week. So, what we see here though, this is moving into spiritual maturity. This is not heaven. This is not being given based on their, heaven is a place of rest. It's a place of being with God and kind of as a reward there are rewards for what we do here on earth. That's not what this represents. They're going into combat, they're going into battle, but they're going to accomplish things and establish themselves as a nation that serves God. Now, again, they didn't always do well with that, but that's what they're doing. So this here is very similar. We can see parallels to us in our lives. We're supposed to be submissive to God. We're also supposed to be confident in doing what He sends us to do. And we're supposed to be making a difference in the people around us for His purpose. Remember, our mission is to give the gospel, both for salvation and then teach and train and discipleship. Not to conquer a land, but to help conquer hearts and to bring people to Jesus Christ. All right, let's go ahead and pray. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this lesson. Thank you for Joshua and his humility in serving you, and yet the great way you used him and his abilities and his talents and his understanding of the people and what they needed and how to lead. And yet, as soon as he came face to face with you, he bowed and he recognized that you are in charge. And I pray that you would help us to understand that as well. We have tasks, we have jobs, we have things we're supposed to be doing, but you are the one in charge. You're the one guiding it. And anytime you step in and send us a different direction, I pray that we will respond the same way, that we will be ready, even if the instructions look a little crazy, that we will be ready to follow you and serve you. In Jesus' name, amen. We got a little late, so we will skip the last song. So let's go ahead and be dismissed, and lunch is downstairs.